I'm one of those people who tends to hyperfixate on something, become very obsessed with it for a certain amount of time. And whilst reading as a hobby for me has been definitely a constant over the past few years, it doesn't really feel like a phase I'm just like gonna get over or get bored of. There are certain points in time where I feel like I'm just extra obsessed with reading, and I think March was one of those months for me. I was just in the biggest reading mood this whole month, which was so fun, and because of that we have 20 books to talk about in this wrap up. But I do want to say this is not normal for me. Like I said, I was just in a huge reading mood, and although I might sound like a broken record at this point, I feel like it's very important to say it doesn't matter how many books you read per month, per year, whatever it may be, as long as you had fun reading, that is a successful reading month to me. If I read 2 books but I had fun, I would still count that as a successful reading month. So that being said, let's get into the books that I read in March. I started off the month with the Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels. First of all, this is one of my favorite books that I own, purely because the cover is just so stunning. I love the colors, I love the design, I just think it's so beautiful. I don't know what I really expected going into this, but this is like a historical romance, but it also has fantasy elements. It's kind of like Bridgerton, but add pirates. If I had to describe this book in one word, I would just say fun. The humor is so witty, which I love. I love witty humor in books especially, and I feel like it kind of had a bit of everything. It has adventure elements. People are trying to assassinate people and like kind of like complete missions, I guess. So there's adventure, there's romance. Despite them literally trying to like assassinate people or trying to save people from being assassinated, it's still very light-hearted. And I will say, although there is obviously a romance going on, it doesn't feel like a super deep or emotional romance. It's all just very light and fun. I feel like this would be a fantastic palate cleanser. I ended up rating it 3.75, mostly because although I really enjoyed it, I never felt super attached to the storylines, super attached to the characters, but I just like enjoyed my reading experience a lot. So it could even be a 4 stars probably, but I'll probably stick to my 3.75. Next, I picked up You Deserve Each Other by Sarah Hogle. I am kind of mad at myself that I didn't pick this up earlier because it's been on my TBR for so long. This is the perfect rom-com. I think I rated this like 4.5. I will say the first half was not my favorite, but the second half really made up for it. This book is about a couple who are engaged. I really wish this book was dual POV, but we only get to hear from the girl's point of view, and basically in her mind she really thinks the relationship is over and she just wants to kind of like get out. So she is basically doing everything in her power to get her fiance to break up with her, to stop the wedding, to end the relationship without just like actually having the conversation of breaking it up herself. I do feel like there's a lot of miscommunication in this book, but it's kind of like the main point. Like the whole point is that they're not talking, they're not communicating, and that's why she is doing all these like stupid things to try and sabotage their relationship. And so the miscommunication is almost like necessary for the plot. I don't like miscommunication when it's kind of just like they had no other conflict ideas, so they just chucked it in there to like have a third act breakup. But this kind of like, you can understand why it's in there, and it's kind of the whole premise of the situation. So obviously a huge chunk of the book is her trying to like sabotage the relationship, but then after a while some things happen and it's a bit of a second chance romance, which is really cute. It kind of reminded me of How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, with the whole trying to like sabotage the relationship but falling in love anyway. And the last thing I'll say is, if your love language is acts of service, please read this book, because my love language is acts of service, and this man does the cutest things, and I was obsessed with it. I loved it. The next book I picked up was Daisy Jones and the Six. This is a reread for me. I read this back in 2021 and absolutely loved it, like was so obsessed with it. And it's one of those books that has definitely stuck with me. And obviously seeing all the hype about the TV show and everyone just like talking about it, it just made me want to reread it so bad. So I actually listened to this on audio, which is the first time I've listened to the audiobook, and so many people recommend the audiobook because it's full cast, which means every person in this book has their own voice actor, which is not always the case in audiobooks, and it just makes it a real experience. And I really loved how the personalities like came out through the voice actors. And obviously now you have a TV show to watch if you want to really like get the full experience, but I do feel like the audiobook is a great way to consume this book. I'm not the first person to say that, obviously. I feel like everyone says that, but I really enjoyed it, and I can definitely see myself rereading this in future. It was 5 stars the first time, 5 stars the second time. Honestly, even better the second time round, because you notice so many of the little things that you might have missed the first time. And it's really inspired me to do some more rereads of my favorite books, because I just had the best reading experience, or listening experience, I guess I should say. Next up, Daisy Haites The Great Undoing. So on my Notion, I write notes as I'm reading books so that I don't forget like my thoughts in the moment. But I just want to read you the dot points that I wrote down for Daisy Haites. Heartbreaking, earth-shattering, how will I continue? I loved it, I hated it, I loved it again and hated it again. How on earth does Jester Hastings get me to love criminals so much? Julian is so problematic, but I'm obsessed with him. Also with Christian. What do you mean I have to wait till 2024 for the next book? So as you can kind of tell, this book evoked a lot of emotions in me. If you don't know, Daisy Haites The Great Undoing is the 4th book in the Magnolia Parks universe, which is my favorite series of all time. I never stop thinking about these books. They are constantly on my mind. It's not just this one, but all of these books are just something else. Like, I don't know how Jester Hastings does this. This was easily my favorite book of the month. I wouldn't be surprised if it's my favorite book of 2023. I am just so obsessed with this world and these characters. I'm gonna stop talking about this now because I could easily go on for hours, but I'm obsessed. Truly and utterly obsessed. And if I haven't convinced you to read those books yet, I don't know what else will. I also started a new fantasy series this month. This is the Bridge Kingdom series. So I read the first book, which is the Bridge Kingdom, and the second book, which is the Traitor Queen. The third book is already out. I haven't read it yet. And the 4th book I think is coming out later this year. But I really enjoyed both of these. I gave this one 4 stars and this one like 4.25. I think I liked this one a little bit better. I feel like that tends to happen a lot in series, at least for me. I end up liking the second book a little bit better. Mostly I think just because I already know the characters, I already know the world, so you can just like jump straight into it. It all feels familiar and it's just a little bit easier to like follow along. To be honest, I don't even know how to explain what this is about. I will say, as soon as I picked this up, I read the first like couple of chapters and I was already hooked. Like, it starts off so well. It starts off with a lot of action and just like in a situation that is so interesting to me. The main character that we're following just like starts off so strongly. Like, she really just shows how smart she is, how determined she is to get things to happen her way, and I just love it. I love a strong female main character, and that is exactly what we get in the Bridge Kingdom, I think. This is enemies to lovers. There's a lot of like politics involved. There is an arranged marriage between like 2 different, like almost like kingdoms, I guess. There is betrayal. There's like secret plans. It's just a lot of fun, and I definitely recommend it. My foot is asleep. This happens every time I fell. Moving on to, unfortunately, my least favorite book of the month. I'm actually so like scared to talk about this. I just get worried because I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, and if you really like that book, I don't want to make you feel bad about it, but that's definitely not my intention, and I'm very much of the opinion that just because a book is not for me, it may be for someone else, and just because I don't love something doesn't mean that you can't or you won't. And I also know that a lot of people love the book that I'm about to talk about. It just wasn't for me. A Million Kisses in Your Lifetime. I'm really sad about it, honestly. I'm really sad that I didn't like it because I really thought I would. When I read the back of this book and found out that it was like a boarding school setting or like prep school setting, whatever you want to call it, I was really excited because I love books set in like colleges or boarding schools. I also love rich kid drama, rich people drama in general. So it really appealed to me in that way. But I quickly realized this was just like not the book for me. I didn't like the plot. I didn't like the characters. I liked the setting, but that was about it. One thing that I just really couldn't get past is it just felt like both of the main characters, the guy and the girl, had major superiority complexes. Like, they just really thought they were better than everyone else, and it was just hard for me to like them. I also just don't love the whole plot being the idea of this guy being like, I'm gonna like claim her and make her mine, and no one has ever touched her before, so she's got this like almost like unattainable, like she is better because she's never been with anyone and I'm gonna make her mine. Like, I just don't like that. I think if you like the type of books that I tend to like, you probably wouldn't enjoy this, but if the things that I've said really appeal to you, then maybe you should read it. It's up to you. Next up we have Kyland, which is kind of the opposite of A Million Kisses in Your Lifetime, because this one is about like rich kids, prep school, and this is about 2 people who are from very like low socioeconomic households, area in general, both really struggling. It's one of those really like heartwarming stories, I would say. The author of this book is Mia Sheridan, who is also the author of Archer's Voice, and I feel like I'm like slowly making my way through some of her backlist. I feel like she has a lot of books, so I don't know if I'll read all of them, but this one definitely intrigued me when I read the back of it, because it's basically about 2 kids who are in high school. Like I said, they both come from homes where they're just like really struggling, they don't have a lot of money, and because of that, they don't really have a lot of options after they finish high school. However, in their small town, there is one scholarship that gets given out every year that obviously means they can go away to college, they can get out of their small town. It just really opens up the world of opportunities for them. So both Tenley and Kyland are both like fighting for this scholarship, but during the process of them like really trying to get this scholarship, they fall in love. And so now there's this real like moral dilemma of, I really want this scholarship because I need to get out of this small town, but now I've also fallen in love with the person that I'm competing with to get this scholarship. So it's almost like, do I want them to have it? Do I want myself to have it? It's really hard as a reader to read this and know that only one person's going to get this scholarship and like change their life, I guess. It is a very typical Mia Sheridan book. I feel like in every Mia Sheridan book that I've read, which I haven't read that many, I've read like 4, but in every one that I've read, it's very much like two people from broken homes who have really struggled and they both just have a lot of baggage and then they fall in love. And not to say that love conquers all, but it is a little bit like that. And obviously that's not super realistic because we can't just like fall in love and it solve all our problems, but it can happen in books and I do love it. I do love reading stories about two people who are just like struggling and then they get a happily ever after. Then I picked up Belladonna and I really liked this. This was 4.5 stars for me. This is a YA gothic fantasy with romance. The writing in this book is beautiful. It's very atmospheric. It gives those like eerie kind of gothic vibes. In this book, we're following 19-year-old Signa, who has just like gone through it, honestly. Like she has lost a lot of her loved ones. A lot of people in her life have passed away and she's just like really confused. She basically thinks she's cursed because everyone around her keeps dying. She gets to the point where she is determined not to let anyone else around her die, obviously. So she is basically trying to solve the mystery of why it keeps happening to everyone around her and how she can make it stop. So that's kind of the whole premise. Also in this book, you basically have a Grim Reaper kind of person who is like Death. Like his name is Death and he basically is the Grim Reaper. Like he shows up every time someone's gonna die. And so she is like really mad at him because she's like, why are you doing this? Like I don't understand. And you get a lot more of his story, which I really, really liked. He's such an interesting character. There are also multiple love interests in this book. And for a long time, I really wasn't sure who I wanted her to end up with. There is a morally grey love interest, which of course we all love. And it was overall just a really fun time. I will say it was a little bit more on the slower paced side of things, but for me it wasn't an issue. I loved it. I really enjoyed my whole reading experience. I feel like it was just super vibey. Like it just felt like you were in this world and like seeing things the way that they did in these beautiful old houses and these like dark forest gardens, and everything was described so well. Also, I will say I went into this thinking it was a standalone. It is the first book in a trilogy. The other 2 books aren't out yet. I think the second book comes out this year. Either way, I'm excited to continue the series and I'm very intrigued to see what happens next. Next, I finished Some Kind of Perfect, which is the last book in the Addicted/Calloway Sisters series. The like 600 or 700 page epilogue novel is definitely a long book with like no plot. But did I rate it 5 stars? Absolutely I did. I honestly really enjoyed it. It was a very comforting read for me. I just kind of like read a few chapters before I went to bed every night because again, it's not plot heavy. There's not a whole lot going on in terms of like you really need to be paying attention. It almost feels like a collection of short stories of all the characters that you know and love from the rest of the series. So obviously I don't recommend reading this unless you have read every other book in the series, but as someone who just like fell in love with the characters, it was a really nice way to say goodbye, I guess. Okay, next up I read 4 books from a series on my Kindle. The series is called the Calamity Montana series. It's a small town romance series by Devney Perry, who is also the author of The Edens. I mean, she has a lot of other series as well, but I feel like The Edens is the one that she is most known for. I love The Edens, and so when my friend Kirsty messaged me being like, I think you'd really like her other series called Calamity, I was like, okay, fine, I'll read it. And since they're all on Kindle Unlimited, it's just obviously very accessible. So I didn't finish the series this month. I read The Bribe, which is the first book, The Bluff, which is the second book. I also read the novella, which is called The Booty, which is just like a cute little short story, I guess. And then also the third book, which is The Brazen. The series as a whole is not like the most mind-blowing, amazing, best thing I've ever read, but there is something about it that makes me want to keep reading. Like, these romances are not life-changing. They're not even like that great, but I just really, really like them. I think I just really have a soft spot for small town romances. There is something just so familiar and comforting about reading multiple books that feature the same small town, the same cafe, the same bar, the same gym, the same characters who have cameos in other books. I love it. And I feel like Devney Perry just really knows how to write small town romance. I mean, obviously, she's written so many of them, like you'd hope she's good at it, but she really is. It really is her strong suit. And I feel like these books specifically are a great palette cleanser in between more like intense or intimidating reads. Like I said, they're not like 5-star reads for me, but they are just so lovely and comforting and cute and fun. The storylines are really fun and still really interesting. I won't go into depth about them because I feel like I just don't have the time. I personally think if you liked the Edens, you will also like Calamity Montana, and I'm excited to continue the series next month and probably finish it. Next up, we have Icebreaker. This is a sports romance. We have a hockey player and a figure skater who are forced to share the same ice rink at their college. They usually have two. Something happens to one of the rinks, so now they have to share, and of course, they're not really happy about it. It's Grumpy Sunshine reverse, so the girl is grumpy, the guy is like very golden retriever. It's a bit of a, I don't know if enemies to lovers is a right trope, but kind of like we don't like each other into lovers, of course. Like what do you expect? It's a romance. Of course that's gonna happen. It is very interesting because I rated this 4 stars, which is pretty good. Like I feel like 4 stars is a fantastic rating, but on paper, this is just not my kind of romance. It's not that I don't like sports romances, but they're definitely like not my thing. Like if I see small town romance or sports romance, I'm 100% gonna go for the small town romance every single time. Also, not a slow burn. Not a slow burn at all. Which again, I love a slow burn. I froth a slow burn. Grumpy Sunshine, also not my favorite. And despite all of those things, I really enjoyed this. One thing that this book does have that I am always gonna read again and again and again is found family. And this book does found family very well, to the point where I can overlook it not being a slow burn. I can overlook the Grumpy Sunshine sports romance thing. If you tell me a book has found family, I will be there. And the found family in this book is phenomenal. It surprised me. I wasn't expecting to enjoy this as much as I did, but I did. It was a really fun time. Then we have Emily Wilde's Encyclopaedia of Faeries, and oh my goodness, 5 stars. 5 freaking stars. This is my first ever cozy fantasy, and I need more. I want to read every cozy fantasy I can get my hands on. If you haven't heard about cozy fantasy, I feel like the best way to describe it is kind of just like low stakes. Like there's not any like crazy political huge battle like save the world type of thing. And don't get me wrong, I love a fantasy book where there's like crazy stuff happening and great political intrigue. Like I love all of that stuff. But I also discovered that I love this. It felt, I was about to say so cozy, obviously that makes sense, it's literally called a cozy fantasy, but it did. It felt so cozy, so comforting. It just felt like I was just like, it's so nice, it's so lovely. And you might be like, Rachel, what is this book about? And to that I would say, it is about Emily Wilde and her Encyclopedia of Faeries. So she is a professor who is writing this encyclopedia, and to do that she obviously has to go out and do field research. So she goes and basically travels the world and goes to different areas and studies the fairy folklore of that area. And I'm pretty sure when we start this book, she's kind of like right at the end, and she only has like one area and one specific type of fairy folklore that she really needs to research and write about. And so she has traveled to the one place where those fairies are, and so she's staying in this very like, I don't know if secluded is the right word, but it's like a small town, a little village. So on one side of the story we have her just like doing her research, writing her notes, doing the field work, and on the other side of the story, because she's in this small village, she kind of has to make friends with the townspeople and integrate herself into the village and into the community of people there, because she really needs to be able to talk to them to gain more information, and also just to like understand the community and the townspeople and stuff like that. And that is the part that she's really not good at. She's incredible with the research, but she's not great at like socializing or like building relationships. My camera just died. I'm sorry if the angle is different, but partway through the story, her academic rival Bamblebee shows up, and he is not so good at the research and field work part, but he is very good at the socializing part. So they kind of team up in order to work to their strengths and make this encyclopedia happen. And a lot more happens, and it's really, really cute, and the storyline that just develops is so wholesome and so sweet, and I was just so obsessed with it. I will say, I went into this book being told that it was academic rivals to lovers, and it is, but the romance is literal crumbs. Do not go into this book expecting it to be a big romance or like an earth-shattering romance. It is simply not. It is minuscule romance, but it's still there, and I still really enjoyed the romance that we did get. And also, I thought that this was going to be a standalone. It is not. There is a second book coming out next year. However, again, this one does end in a way that very much like sums this up. I think you could read this book and be done with it and not have to pick up the second book. But again, just for those people who might think they're going into a standalone, not quite. This book here was one of my biggest surprises all month. I honestly 100% bought it for the cover because the cover is so freaking cute, and there is something about pink books that I cannot resist. And so I was like, oh, I guess I'll pick this one up. Like, finally, I should just get to it. I feel like from what I'd heard from other people, it was a lot of, yeah, it's good, but it's not fantastic. It's just like a fun romance. It's like whatever. And I started reading this book and I found myself loving it. And I was like, wow, this is really well written. I really like this. And I kept reading it and I was like, wow, this is really good. I really like this. And I think I read this book in 2 sittings. I loved it. Like, I loved this book. It was 5 stars for me. I was so shocked that it was 5 stars for me because, like I said, I went in thinking it was just going to be like fine and mediocre, and it was phenomenal. I want to say this very lightly, but it kind of gave me the same feeling as Evelyn Hugo, in the sense of One of Us is famous, behind the scenes of Hollywood, what is really happening in famous people's lives, behind the scenes, writing the article, interview type of thing. There were elements of it that gave Evelyn Hugo vibes. I don't want to say it fully gave me the exact same feeling because they are very different books, but if you like the interview vibe, if you like the Hollywood actor, the behind the scenes of famous people's lives, like, I love that. I froth a One of Us is famous trope, and I feel like this really satisfied that desire of mine. The basic premise of this book is there's a guy who's an actor, he's going to be the new James Bond, and he gets interviewed by this reporter, interviewer, whatever, and the interview that's supposed to last for like a lunch ends up lasting the entire weekend. So the reporter ends up spending 3 days with this actor guy. There's definitely chemistry, they're definitely gravitating towards each other, and the end of that weekend happens, then something happens and they just don't speak. The interview gets written and published and it pops off, but the actor and the reporter don't speak. And now it is 10 years later, and the team of the reporter and the team of the actor have decided it would be a great idea for the two to recreate the original interview that they did. So like recreate the weekend that they spent together 10 years before. So we have a then and now timeline, a bit of a second chance situation, and I just loved every second of it. It was really fun. I also finished a non-fiction book, which is really great because I'm trying to read one a month. This is Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland, and I loved this so much. Again, 5 stars. I feel like sometimes I don't even rate non-fiction because it's just like, who am I to say anything about a non-fiction book? But I just love this so much. This is Christian non-fiction, and it is all about the heart of Christ. And it was a book that I'd heard a lot about but never really considered picking up until one of my friends was like, oh my gosh, I'm reading this book. It is so good. And so of course I was convinced and I picked it up and I'm now obsessed with it. And I think it's going to be one of those books that I genuinely reread every year because I think I need to hear the words in this book every year and remind myself of them because it was just beautiful and really easy to read. Short chapters, beautifully written, stunning. And finally, we have the last 2 books that I read in March, and that is Lord of Shadows and Queen of Air and Darkness. And these are book 2 and book 3 in the Dark Artifices by Cassandra Clare. And these books are chunky, so chunky. Finishing these books is an achievement and I'm proud of myself for doing so. I really enjoyed these 2. The first book in the trilogy I rated 3.75, but I was also in a reading slump when I read it, so I don't know if that was very helpful. The second book I rated 4 stars and the third book I rated 4.5. I really liked the third book. I feel like it was a great conclusion to not only the trilogy but also the Mortal Instruments. So I would not recommend picking up the Dark Artifices unless you've read the Mortal Instruments. The reading orders of the Shadowhunters books is very confusing. I'm not going to go into it now because I feel like this video is already long enough as it is, but I think I liked the Dark Artifices better than the Mortal Instruments, but I think the Infernal Devices is still my favorite, and I'm very intrigued to see where I rank the last hours when I finally pick up those books. But those are all the books that I read in March. Thank you so much if you've stuck to the end because I feel like I have been talking for so long and I am very excited to stop talking and stop hearing the sound of my own voice. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Hopefully you found a new book that you might want to pick up. Hopefully April will be just as good of a reading month as March was because we just read some fantastic books in March and now my standards are very high. But I love you guys so much. I hope you have a fantastic day or night whenever you're watching this, and I will see you in my next video very soon. Good